Well, welcome, Dr. Mackey. Thanks again. A reprisal of our successful video chat a few weeks ago. New topics to talk about, so thanks for coming.
Well, thanks for having me here. I'm sorry that we're missing the conference. I was really looking forward to being the Sunday morning speaker, and especially in a beautiful place like Orange Beach, but times are as they are, and so I appreciate the opportunity to talk to people virtually.
We are really missing it, and yes, you were going to be our keynote speaker on Sunday, and so hopefully we can actually talk about some of the other things that are going on at the department that aren't COVID and virtual related, but that truly is what's on everybody's mind. And so we know, based on your communication to superintendents, that we're coming really close to having the final plan for reopening, or at least the plan as it is now. And while respecting the fact that you want to share that with superintendents first on Monday, can you give us like a broad overview of some of the things we anticipate will be in it in the general categories?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, so the plan right now is to have a draft, embargo draft that we would share with superintendents next week and begin to go through it and probably make a few more changes as they react to it and give us some ideas. We're also lining up with public health, and that's one of the things that's taking us a little bit of time, is we want to make sure that our categories and public health's categories, which have also not been announced yet, are going to line up. So the worst thing that could happen would be for the schools in a certain county, say, to be in yellow and the barbershops to be in red, or the vice versa. So that would really confuse people and cause a lot of angst in the community. So we're going to make sure that doesn't happen. We've spent a lot of time this week with Dr. Harris making sure that we line up. We expect that public health is going to release something in the next several days, and then we will follow their release with our public document. It's possible they might be released together. We're still kind of working through all those things. But to your point, so some of the main topics are going to be in there. It'll be a multi-tiered system, probably color-coded, almost certainly color-coded. Right now we're looking at multiple tiers. We've looked at, as you know, you've served on that task force, we started out with 3 tiers. We have looked at samples from around the world that are as many as 8 tiers, and I think we'll probably are going to settle with a 4-tier system. That's not settled for sure yet, but probably something like that. And so as you see more spread in the community, then you're going to see that we would escalate from one tier to the other, or de-escalate. One of the interesting things that we have to remember is that the community as a whole is important, but the school might be different. So we might be seeing heavy community spread, but then our principals might turn around and say, hey, we have no issues or very few issues at our school. Why is that? Well, in many cases, what we're seeing when a county gets a lot of high infection rates, they're having problems like in a nursing home. Or a special kind of facility. And so it may not affect the school. So decisions will have to be made both looking at the public health data and also what's actually going on in the school.
That makes sense, trying to understand them. And so the phase relate to when schools will have to make the decision of, are we open fully, are we closed, and then that I think the great consternation is that in-between area. What do we do when there's some spread going that? So what are the general topics that are going to be covered by the plan?
Very good. So instruction is going to be the biggest piece. There's no question about it. I'm really proud of the instruction piece. We've had Opportunity Labs working with us, and I had a call with them early this morning. Fortunately, they're on Eastern time, so we can start early. But they really are proud of the instruction piece too, and what Alabama's done with that. So you're going to see a lot of guidance, again, local school systems making their own decisions, but a lot of guidance about thinking through how you may have some students in the classroom, some students learning remotely, and unfortunately we're going to have people who go back and forth. We're going to have some teachers who may be teaching virtual part of the day and teaching children in the seats, if you will, part of the day, and some may not do that. They may say, no, we're going to have some teachers that are teaching full-time, virtual, and we're going to have some teachers that are teaching full-time with students in the classroom. And we're trying to get away from the word virtual because, as you know, we're not opening a true virtual school. We're trying to use the word remote learning.
Okay.
So we want to have an opportunity for students who are not at school for whatever reason. Maybe they've been quarantined, maybe they just don't feel comfortable coming to school, and the local board has said we're gonna let a certain number of our students just learn remotely this year if they're not comfortable. Different boards will have different policies around that. But what we have done as a state is we're close. Probably by the time this video actually goes out, we're going to have be in the process of a contract with a vendor to provide curriculum, online lessons for remote learning. And then it'll be up to each district to deliver that. And that's why that instruction piece is so important, because you'll be using your own teachers to deliver that remote learning. We're doing polling, as I think you know, and we think that between 15 and 20% of students are going to choose to do remote learning at the beginning of the school year, which means the vast majority of our students plan on coming back to the classroom. But those numbers could shift during the year as we see outbreaks change in different communities. We can certainly see those numbers going up or down. And as you say, that gray area is what's got all of us the most worried.
Well, and I think it's important to look at that as different situations. Parents and students who make the election at the beginning of the year, we're not comfortable, we're going to engage in remote learning going forth. And those who are temporarily, let's say, a parent is test positive, and I think the protocol generally is would the student be to quarantine for 14 days. So in those cases, that would be a temporarily situation of remote learning. And so thinking this through for school leaders, we're going to have policies and procedures. It will be very confusing to have students coming in and out. That's, I guess, more like homebound. Do you foresee that the policies related or recommended policies for students who elect remote learning at the beginning, that would be a more consistent decision, and there would be exit opportunities perhaps, at the end of the quarter, at the end of a certain grading period, as opposed to, I'm remote learning this week, but I won't next week?
Yeah, well, that would be the worst case scenario. And I think you're right. We do want to put policies in place that would keep students from going back and forth. I mean, I've seen some jokes out there where people say, well, bring your kids on the days you feel like it. Don't bring your kids on the day you don't feel like it. I hope we don't have any parents that are thinking that way. But we certainly, the worst case scenario for children and for teachers, but especially for children, is going to be if they are coming in, just that awful scenario just gave. I'm here this week in school, next week I'm going remote learning, the next week I'll be back in school. So we really don't want that. Now, that being said, we know there may be a few situations because of health issues where students are in and out. We've been dealing with that for years, right? Mm-hmm. We have students who have really difficult health situations and they're kind of in and out. But they should be very few and far between. As much as possible, we want people to choose one path or the other. And then as you said, we're going to have these quarantine issues. And that's why it's not my largest worry. I'll get to that in a minute if you want me to. But my second largest worry is the quarantine issue, because we could have a parent, it could be a teacher, it could be a student, and they become quarantined. And under the public health guidance then, we have to do contact tracing, and other people, as you said, even if they're not symptomatic, may have to be at home quarantined. And so how do we deal with that situation? Because you could end up in a case where, like, what if your whole English department gets quarantined? Then how do you and it doesn't affect your students, they're all coming to school, but your whole English department's out. So those are certainly nightmarish situations, but those are the kinds of things we all have to be thinking about, because we probably will be in some situations like that over the next few months, and we'll have to figure that out. So we've been talking a little bit about reverse remote, that we could actually have teachers who were remote because of that situation and students were in the classroom. And that's not ideal, but how do you deal with that? We've got smart school leaders out there. Our boards are going to have to be supportive, because it's going to be a very hard year. So just expect you're going to get calls and complaints, and there won't be answers to everything, but we'll work through it. There will be a lot of answers to some questions. And then the other thing they're going to have to do is be flexible, because it's going to be a year that calls for a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, we'll do the best we can. So, all right, you baited me a little. That's not your worst scenario. So what is the worst scenario?
The worst thing, maybe not scenario, but the
Your
worst
fear.
is really the health and mental health of our teachers. It really is. I mean, it's that it's going to be such a stressful and difficult year that people may just retire on us, or people may say, I'm not doing that anymore. I mean, we could end up with a real workforce problem. It's going to be a lot of stress on our teachers. And I think one of the things we have to do as leaders, superintendents and board members, is just be honest with people that it is going to be a difficult year. And we'll get through it, and we'll teach kids, and we'll be better off on the other end, but it is not going to be an easy year by any means.
No, I agree with you. When you're giving your scenario of perhaps a teacher being exposed, I could see certain personnel in school systems actually having multiple, exposures based on students coming into the system. All right, so we've talked about the plan. We'll deal with instruction. What are some other components of the reopening plan?
Sorry, yeah, back to that. So instruction, wellness.
Okay.
So we have a subcommittee that's been working just on wellness, and that includes really what's the role of the school nurse, what are the roles of teachers and the school secretary and the principal and everybody else, working with the school nurse to try to maintain healthy environments, mental health of our students and staff. We worked into the wellness area. And then the third component is really what we call reopening, but it's really about facilities and operations. So school buses, what are school buses going to look like? What's the school facility going to look like? Those kind of things. Of course, don't have the whole plan finalized, but I can tell you we're being as open as we can about those things. So the CDC put out some guidance that in some scenarios you might put, one child every other seat on a bus and all these kind of things. We know that's not practical. So we're not going to recommend things that are not practical. Now, some school systems may say, well, for us that is practical. Or for if we have a bus that just serves special needs children and there are children on there who have really susceptible issues, then we want to be more careful with them. Well, they might do that. But on a regular school bus route, we're going to be talking about practical safety. What are the things that we can do? So there are things we can do every day. We can do a really good job of making sure we wipe down surfaces, keep them clean. We're going to need cooperation from students. They're going to need to sit forward facing and not be leaning over from seat to seat and those kind of things. And those are good practices anyway, but especially this year, we're going to need parents to have to talk with their children and say we've got to be especially mindful of personal space and keeping distance as best we can. So we'll be looking at those things. We're also talking about obviously cleaning routines. So how do you clean things we don't normally think about, like playground equipment? So normally those things get cleaned sometimes, maybe by the rain.
I was gonna say rain.
But so if you've got multiple children moving in and out during the day, then what are some practical ways? Obviously, you can't wipe down the monkey bars every time between one child and the next child. But are there things that we can do that can kind of mitigate what spread might look like in those situations? And we'll be talking about classroom cleanliness too. So again, there's some things we can do like in high schools where students are changing classes, wiping down, especially desks, doorknobs, those kind of things. They're high-touch surfaces. I know we've talked to some school leaders who are saying they are considering, we're not saying folks need to do this, but considering trying to rotate their teachers and not rotate their students, especially in middle grades. And that is certainly something that could help because you've got fewer people then moving around the building. But those are some of the things we're looking at to try to help people think through. And I want to make this point before we go to the next question, and that's that we don't intend to make the decisions for local communities. Every school campus looks different. I was principal of a school campus that had 8 buildings and 1,000 children, and none of the buildings were connected by internal hallways. It was the old open campus concept. And I've been in schools, some of the new schools that are built, are all, contained corridors, and we've just got so many different scenarios out there that there's no one thing where we can say, well, this is how you're going to set up your desk, and this is how you're going to do this, and this is how you're going to do that. We know that. We know that we're going to have to give principals and teachers, and superintendents and school boards as much discretion as possible, and yet also give them some guidance so they don't feel like they're just out on an island by themselves.
Well, that's a great point, and I think I'd like to explore it a little bit more, because the guidance is going to come out, and people have a tendency to read guidance as requirements.
Right.
And it is my understanding, and the Opportunities Lab folks have been great, is one of the things we're concerned about is making sure all our students learn. And knowing that we have a digital gap, knowing that it is harder for some students due to family circumstances to learn as well remotely, that the advantage is, if all possible, to have in-seat instruction in our buildings. So with the eye of doing towards that, knowing that there are a lot of concerns about the health and safety, talk a little bit about the balancing act, because looking at some of the CDC guidance and other things that are out there, they're good practices, but they're not always practical. So if there's, for example, 10 recommendations or suggestions, and you can do about 5 of them, talk about those decisions that school officials are going to have to make. And related to that, the concept of minimizing or mitigating, issues. Right. If it's just a classroom or a grade level that's been exposed, or a feeder pattern in one school, talk about some of the decisions school officials need to be prepared to consider going forward in that area.
Absolutely, great. So one of the things that is kind of a foundational piece is that we see all schools opening as a physical option in the fall. I mean, that's now, again, local boards have discretion about that. And I know that there's debate going on inside those board halls and inside their minds about what should we do. But what we would like to see is this, that because we know the majority of kids want to come back to a physical presence. I've been on a lot of calls this week, done Chambers of Commerce and Workforce Council calls and all, and they are all worried about the schools just closing down, the churches and daycares all closing down, and people who need to go to work not having a place to put their children. They're worried about education, but they're also worried about just a physical place for the children to go. So we see schools being open, and then there also being a remote option. Again, some local boards may say, I was asked yesterday, do boards have to, not by a board member, but do they have to offer a remote option? I said, well, I don't guess they have to, but I haven't talked to any board members that don't want to teach 20% of the children in their community, so they're going to have to work, they're going to work something out. Anyway, as we move through that, we're going to give some recommendations. We're not calling them recommendations. We're trying to talk about guidance and considerations, and are there certain things that are essential. Those are words you may see again, may not, because we're still working on the words. But what we want to make sure is that there's always an understanding that the local situation matters the most. So, for instance, just give you an example. If we say, one of the things you should consider doing is, or strongly consider, or we in our guidance, or however we put that, is to wipe down the student desk between classes. Mm-hmm. If I'm teaching in the classroom and things get really busy, and between 5th period and 6th period, I don't get to wipe the desk down, and a child in 6th period gets diagnosed, and then their mother catches it from them, and we don't want, we don't intend to have any opportunity where that school board or that teacher, anybody feels set up that now somebody could come back and sue them and say, well, the teacher didn't follow the guidance. These are recommendations. Many of them are what we might call best practices, but they are not law. They are not requirements. And we don't want to put additional requirements on local schools, and certainly not on our governance structure, our boards, so that we create liability. And you'll see legal disclaimers in there on that. But as much as we can, obviously we work with this Senator Orr this past year and said, we want schools included. We'll make it very clear that there won't be any liability on our folks because they are not able to fully comply. Certainly with CDC guidelines.
Yeah.
I mean, again, we know many of those things. There's just no possible way that we'd be able to comply with those things. So we're going to build in as many protections as possible. This is a good way to do it, but it's not the only way to do it, and you're not expected to do more than you have the capacity to do. And to add one more component, you're not expected to do everything perfect every time, like that example where a teacher just forgets to wipe things down, or those things are going to happen.
Well, no, and thank you for that. I think you're right in terms of communication and expectations. It's going to be a challenging year. Sometimes we're going to have to, change on a dime, and it won't always go as smoothly as we would like it to go, but continue to practice, grace and mercy in terms of doing that. And I think that's an important part of the discussion is, if the goal is to, at all possible, have school, we need to explore, ways to do that we can to protect students, but still have them in the classroom if all possible. I am struck by some of the issues that are coming up, there's still a great fear factor out there. And I think the communications challenge that comes with this is going to be significant. We have talked before, and you hear a little bit of a suggestion that schools may look at some alternative scheduling in order to be able to comply with, social distancing, spacing, and other things as their choice to safety. You want to talk about that a little bit more? Are you hearing much about that? Maybe going every other day. I don't know if half days are real practical. Do you think that's an option for folks?
It could certainly be an option. You've got to look at your community. Again, I go back to where are those students going to be? Who's going to be keeping them on the opposite days? We believe that there will be, there are going to be situations where you have that group of folks who just want to do remote learning. And then once we have some positive cases in the community or in the school, I should say, then you may get to the place where 30% or more of your students are home. And so then, if you got that many fewer kids in the building, can you space out your desk more? Can you do some things like have a teacher who's teaching, 2 of us are teaching 10th grade English, and I'm going to take all the students who are here today, and you're going to teach the ones who are learning remotely, and then tomorrow we swap that out. Other places you're going to have one teacher that loves the remote learning, and they're going to say, I'll teach all the 10th graders, maybe not just in this school, but in the district. But I'll just teach all of the ones that are home because you can have a bigger load and you don't have to do as many, spend as much time on it per day because they're doing their lessons digitally. And then your other teachers can spread out. Maybe you can put fewer into a classroom. It's going to be a scheduling nightmare now. It really is. But back to the point you just raised. So the idea that you would have maybe just tell half your children, hey, you come on Mondays and the other half you come on Tuesdays, that would purely be a local decision. But I think we'd have a lot of concern in many communities about doing that. And that's why you're not going to see something in our guidance that says, well, your students' desks have to be 6 feet apart or 8 feet apart or whatever, no matter what. And so then you go measure your desk out and then build your schedule around that. Well, that's not practical.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of confusion out there because some state plans have already come out, and there are states whose plans say that. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be one of the confusing points is that we're not going to have the same thing going on in all the states around the country. And we're talking, I'm talking to folks in many states, but really comparing those with the states that border us mostly. Because that's where we have the most transition back and forth across borders and those kind of things. But I don't know, we've just got to be careful that we offer, I think, that we offer an on-campus opportunity to students because we all benefit from a rolling economy and we're going to need the economy to keep rolling, parents to keep working. and that's going to be important.
Well, thank you for addressing that, because it's been interesting to see all the suggestions and possibilities, just like the guidelines that sound good but aren't very practical
Right.
when you think about the situation facing our parents and our communities. I'm going to shift gears a little, and those decisions on to open and close are going to be difficult. And I know one of the challenges you have shared with the team is that we don't necessarily have good data, or we don't have good data yet.
Right.
And not throwing stones, it's just an issue. Department of Public Health has been underfunded, doesn't quite have the staff at this point that it needed to have to get some of these numbers. What are kind of the things that we need to look at, or do we anticipate any changes coming online that will help school officials analyze these decisions? Because you're so right, what's happening in a community, you need to look at your numbers, but you need to understand the why behind the numbers. So do you envision, some information coming available to school boards that will be helpful, or what metrics would you have them look at?
Absolutely. So I think that in working with public health and Dr. Harris, certainly by the time school starts, and maybe much sooner than that, we will have interactive map of the state that'll let you see a little more information about what the community spread looks like in your community. It may be by county, it may be better, more specific than by county. They're still working on what they can do. The problem with that data, that's good, that'll be great to have. It's a great first piece, but the problem with that goes back to what we mentioned earlier, and that is that what the community looks like may not be reflective of what the school looks like, because you could have a situation where there's an outbreak unfortunately, nursing homes have been hard hit around the country and in our state, we know that. And so the county may look one way, but the school may not feel the same way. So it's got to be one piece of data. One of the things we're going to encourage is that superintendents, their school nurses, or if they have in some of the larger systems a school safety person, and that they put together a committee and they have regular, maybe weekly, and at times it may need to be more often than weekly, and sometimes it may not have to be weekly, but conversations with public health officials and EMA in their communities. The EMA is taking on a lot of these responsibilities for public health. Our state EMA office has pretty much just relocated from Clanton to Montgomery to help staff up public health. The National Guard is helping staff up public health, and so they've been able to pull in these other groups. Well, that will be helpful to us too, because every county has an EMA, and we will build these conversations where we begin to talk about, well, what's it look like in our community? What does it look like in our schools? And are there changes that we need to make? Do we need to think about, how we approach school, how we approach extracurricular activities and those kind of things? But, at this point, I would anticipate that things will float up and down, but we would not get to the place, we hope, that everything shuts down again. We don't want that, obviously, and I know that's what we're going to try to avoid, and I think public health is going to try to avoid that, going forward. But it's going to have to be a hand-in-hand situation with them.
Well, Dr. Harris was awesome to work with. He and Jennifer Ventris did a webinar for us, and I think that was very helpful. I think you have a really hard job now. His is pretty hard too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no question.
I had to think that. But you touched on the big issue, and Alabama, we're all about our extracurricular activities, particularly sports. So the guidelines related to sports and those extracurricular activities, is that going to come from the Department of Health, the High School Athletic Association, a little bit of both? And when can we anticipate those?
Probably a little bit of all those. I think that, we're going to give some best practices to think about how ball games, volleyball games, football games, even cross country. I think swimming is the fourth sport we do in the fall. Swimming is probably the easiest one of those to keep doing. How we move forward with those things in the fall, and we'll kind of see how that goes. So
Because
we're
it does,
working on it.
yeah, it does change the element, golf is big at my house and golf has come back, but no spectators, and it's just,
Right.
it's odd, hey, my husband's happy to have something else to watch, but beyond that.
Yeah.
All right.
I just want to say one thing on that. The governor has said, and we've said, personal responsibility is really important in this thing. And so people are going to have to think about, if I'm going to go out to, if I'm going to go to my child's game and that kind of thing, what are things I can do, not just to protect myself, that's certainly important, but anybody around me who might have an underlying health problem that I don't know about. So we can think about things like you and I are doing today, just stand distant from people. Obviously, City of Montgomery now, there's a mask ordinance. So you and I, you have yours, I have mine. We go outside, we wear it. So there are things we can do. And that will change too from community to community, because if the local, if the mayor, the town council says in our town, you have to do it this way, then in that town, that's how we'll do it.
Yeah. Well, to that point, the AASB Board of Directors met yesterday, and we're looking at our events coming up, and you asked me about our fall conference. We plan to have a live conference. We think we'll be able to social distance, but the board made the decision that they'll ask all participants to wear masks just for the safety of others. And so it was actually a pretty easy decision, the folks said, and so then I said, are you willing to enforce it? Are you willing to go up someone and say, you need to wear a mask? And so we will be communicating it to our membership. But the comment was made that as leaders, we need to set the example. Let's not make it political. Hey, at this point, it looks like it's a safe practice to help others. All right, let me shift gears, because in the middle of all this, you're still running a really large department. There's a lot going on, and you had some terribly exciting news, I think, in terms of Alabama Achieves. So let's talk about
thanks
that.
for asking that. So had this been a normal weekend, and had we been in Orange Beach on Sunday morning, Alabama Achieves is all I would have talked about. So we had the opportunity to roll out a new strategic plan for the state. We call it Alabama Achieves, a new plan for a new decade, with the thoughts that it's a 5-year plan, but really you're building, thinking about the 2020s and what are they going to look like? How are we going to improve academics? So the pieces in there are not going to be earth-shattering to anybody. So we're talking about academics, we're talking about students graduating college and career ready, we're talking about great professionals. So how are we going to make sure we have more teachers, plenty of teachers, and high quality teachers, and beyond that, teachers, principals, leaders, of course, we mean all of those things. How are we going to make sure we take care of our students? And that's been interesting. So safe and supportive learning environments is one of our 5 tenets. And when we started writing the strategic plan, we were pretty rare off of the Parkland shooting, that tragedy. And so a lot of the discussion was consumed with safe and secure environments around school resource officers, better training for resource officers, getting resource officers into all the school, that kind of physical safety. Since then, it has shifted more to thinking about mental health and how do we support the whole student and not just the physical safety, but the whole component of safety and security. And I would say over the last 2 months, it has shifted again to really think about the physical health of children, talking about the COVID stuff and all that's brought about, the mental health, and even down into, when you talk about safe and secure learning environments, how do we teach students to be empathetic to one another and to work together and to understand each other's backgrounds. And so that has shifted some. It's interesting. That tenet's still there, but it's shifted a little bit. The 5th piece is one that might surprise people a little bit, but that one's inward focused. So we have 4 that are outward focused, 1 that's inward focused on the department, on how do we improve ourselves to make ourselves more customer friendly, customer oriented, to improve our processes internally so that we make sure we get consistent answers, get quick answers, and part of that, that's going to be on us to try to make sure. So one of the problems we have is a large department, as you know, lots of subsections, And so somebody calls in with a question, and it's a legal question about federal programs about a particular area. And so depending on how they get in, they might get shifted to legal to answer the question, they might get shifted to someone in federal programs to answer the question, or they might get sent to somebody in instructional services to answer the question. And so even though we try to be really consistent on answers, you're talking to 3 different sections who are coming at it from 3 different ways. And then that scenario gets worse because we have 2 people from a school system who make that call, and they get sent to 2 different places. And so then they're trying to put all the information together. So we're trying to make sure internally, are we getting people to the right source to get the right answer as quickly and efficiently as possible? Are we getting our message out on social media? We're really pushing social media. We've added thousands of followers even since March. And part of that's because we've pushed so much information out on social media, and so people are following that. We're rolling out a new website in a few weeks that'll be mobile friendly for the first time ever. Yay, a mobile friendly website for the department. So we're focused on that customer friendly service piece. So that's our internal piece. And again, the external pieces are academic achievement and growth, college and career readiness for our graduates, outstanding professionals all through the profession, enough of them, and high quality professionals. And then that 4th one is safe and supportive learning environment. And I'm very excited about it, and I hope we can, when everybody's together again, we'd actually printed thousands of copies. I was going to bring a hard copy to every one of your members at the conference. So at the right time, we'll get it out. Last thing I want to say about it, I'm very excited about our strategic plan. So how are we going to do the rollout now? We're going to do a series of videos. We'll probably do 5 4-minute videos that will roll out the 5 components later this summer. And we'll be getting those out as we go into the new school year.
Well, we'll share those, and I will say you have always been very accessible to AASB, and I think the school board members appreciate your time. There's probably 5,000 other things you could be doing right now, so we really appreciate that, and the job you're doing, keep it up.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate AASB, what you're doing. I appreciate our local board members. This is, they are more than earning their money. Many of them earn no money. And the ones that get paid, it's almost a pittance for the work they do. But we gotta all pull our schools through this thing, and their role is so important. And just ask everybody to hang in there with us this year, and let's get through it. Thanks for what you're doing.
Practice mercy and grace in a lot of things, and we will get through this. Thanks again.